Hi guys, I've been wanting to film my birth story for so long and I finally have some time to do it. It's probably going to be pretty lengthy, probably going to have to split it up into 2 or 3 videos. I had an extremely traumatic birth experience. I gave birth via C-section, so leading up into that point, I feel like unless you have a scheduled C-section, it's traumatic to go through a C-section in general, let alone the experience that I had. So I'd like to share it with you guys. Let me just get right into it because it's going to be a long one. So grab some popcorn, grab some wine, and get ready. So I ended up having a little girl June 25th, 2017, and I went into labor, so that was a Sunday. I went into labor the Friday before. So I went into labor on the 23rd, and I did not have her until the 25th at 8:23 p.m. So it was a long road to getting her here. But basically Friday night I was at work. At about 5 p.m. I started having contractions exactly 20 minutes apart. They were lasting only for about 10 to 15 seconds. At this point I wasn't sure if they were Braxton Hicks or if they were actual real contractions. I remember I kept glancing at the clock every time I could feel them. They weren't painful at all, but I definitely could feel them, and I would glance at the clock and I had one at 5, I had one at 5:20, 5:40, and so on and so forth. So they were exactly 20 minutes apart. When I got home that night, they got a little bit more irregular, a little bit more sporadic. So they were then about every 8 to 20 minutes apart, again lasting about 10 to 15 seconds. Nothing serious. I was able to go to sleep that night and sleep as good as a 40-week and 5-day pregnant lady could sleep. So then I woke up the next morning. They had definitely kind of slowed down. So this is Saturday now, the 24th of June. They had definitely slowed down. They were still, roughly about 8 to 20 minutes apart. Super irregular. Again, then at this point I wasn't sure, are they Braxton Hicks? Are they real contractions? I don't really know what's going on. Luckily, my best friend was getting married that day because I typically work on Saturdays, but I just so happened to have off this day, as well as my husband, to get ready for my best friend's wedding. So we ended up running some errands in the morning. We had breakfast, we went to Home Depot, and I remember in Home Depot, I started feeling at some points I felt like I wanted to sit down. I wouldn't say they were painful contractions, but it was enough of a little bit of a jolt for me to be I need to sit down. And then we went to Walgreens, we had lunch at Outback Steakhouse, and I was somewhat timing the contractions a little bit or glancing at the clock, and they were still super irregular, 8 to 20 minutes apart. They didn't seem to be getting any closer together or getting more regular. They weren't lasting very long, so I just went on with the day. We decided to take the dogs for a walk. So I think this is what really kick-started my labor then. We took the dogs on a 3-mile walk on a path through the woods that was up and down hills, over bridges. It was crazy. And I remember thinking, and I think I even said to my husband several times, I hope my water doesn't break right now. At this point I still wasn't having super regular contractions, but when I would have one, I'd be oh my gosh, I hope my water doesn't break. How am I gonna get back to the car? Long story short, I made it. My water didn't break. So then we got home and I started getting ready for the wedding. I took a shower, because then at this point, you know, it's June, the end of June. It was very hot here in Ohio. It was probably about 85 to 90 degrees that day. So I showered, I sat down to do my makeup, and this is when I was like, okay, I think I might be going into labor now. So doing my makeup, I started timing the contractions again. They were about 10 to 15 minutes apart. They were lasting about 20 seconds. So yeah, so I got ready, driving to the wedding. This is really, you know, I had time to just like kind of relax in the car. My husband drove. I was timing the contractions. At this point, they're every 10 minutes apart, lasting about 20 to 30 seconds. So at this point, I'm like, all right. Like, I didn't want to say, like, I think this is it. I'm going into labor, because I wanted to be able to be there for my best friend to get married. I was supposed to be the maid of honor at this wedding. However, for obvious reasons, I couldn't be. So we get to the wedding, and of course it's an outdoor wedding, so I have to sit in 90-degree weather while I'm having these contractions. And at this point, I wasn't timing them. I didn't want to be rude and like have my phone out, you know, throughout the whole wedding timing contractions. So I just like put my phone away. I remember this was like the longest wait of my life. Sitting there waiting for her to come down the aisle, I felt like forever. I thought she was never coming down the aisle. My mom was sitting right behind me, and I kept turning around and saying to my mom, oh my God, Mom, my back hurts so bad. My back was just killing me. And I know my mom was probably like thinking in her head, you're going into labor, you're having back labor right now. But she never said that. She was just like, it'll be okay. You know, we'll be inside soon, whatever. So I survived. I sat there and endured the back labor pain. So I would say this was probably some of the worst contractions, was sitting in the 90-degree heat, and I was like really feeling them in my back then at that point. So those were some pretty intense contractions. And like I said, I wasn't timing them at this point because I didn't want to have my phone out and be rude. So then we ended up staying for the reception. We didn't stay for the whole thing, but we did sit through, you know, their entrance, the speeches, the first dance, the cutting of the cake. I even stayed for food because I knew at this point that I was going into labor and that this was probably going to be the last time I could eat for a while. So I did enjoy dinner. And the table I was at was my whole family, so that was nice. And of course, you know, I'm 40 weeks and 5 days pregnant, so everybody there is like asking me. Nonetheless, I'm like huge. I was huge, humongous. So everyone's asking me, are you feeling anything? How do you feel? And I didn't want to be like, oh, I think I'm going into labor right now. And like, you know, take the spotlight away from my best friend. So I was just like, I feel good. Nothing's happening. I feel great. So I was able to like compose myself for the most part. I will say at one point, I think while we were waiting to be served food, because whatever, you know, you gotta go through, they like go one table at a time. So I'm sitting there waiting, you know, everyone's talking, and all of a sudden I must have started moaning through a contraction, because at this point they were getting pretty strong, and I'm trying to like compose myself, and I must have started moaning through a contraction because the whole table just like stopped, and they were all staring at me, and they're like, oh my God, are you okay? Is everything okay? And I'm just like, yep, I'm good. I'm fine over here. Just keep on talking and just let me be. So it was probably about 9:30 when we decided to finally leave the wedding. I think I ate, and I was like to Matt, okay, we gotta go now. Like, I cannot sit here any longer. I cannot stay composed. So as soon as we got into the car, I whip out my phone, start timing my contractions. Sure enough, they're about 4 minutes apart, lasting about 30 seconds. By the time we got home, which it was probably about 30 to 40 minute drive home. By the time we got home, they were about 4 minutes apart, lasting 40 seconds. So I survived the wedding. I would say about 10:30, I wanted to shower and start getting ready for bed because I did have work the next day. So the next day was going to be Sunday, and I was going to work up until I gave birth. I was scheduled to be induced that Monday. So I would have been exactly 41 weeks at that point. So yeah. So I showered, got my pajamas on, laid down in bed, and continued to time my contractions. So at this point, they're about 3.5 to 4 minutes apart, lasting about 50 seconds to a minute. And I'm like thinking to myself, I have to go to work tomorrow. So like, I need to get my shit together. I need to go to bed. I need to I don't know if I'm in labor. I didn't want to go to the hospital yet because I didn't want to be turned away. And I knew that if I wasn't in labor, I'd have to go to work and then have an induction the very next day. So I wanted to make sure I got a good night's sleep. So I'm like to myself, all right, you need to compose yourself, get it together. You're going to bed. You have work in the morning. So I laid down for probably about 3.5 minutes until the next contraction rolled around. And my husband was already sleeping at this point. I sat up, had the contraction, got out of bed, started pacing the hall back and forth. It wasn't until 11:30 then, so, roughly about an hour later, that, I'm like, all right, clearly I'm not going to bed. I can't sit down. It hurts too bad. I started crying then because I'm like, I don't know what to do. Should we go to the hospital? I wake up mad. I'm like, what should we do? Should we go to the hospital? What do you think? He's like, why don't you just call your doctor and see what the doctor says? So I call the doctor. I get the on-call doctor. And basically the doctor's like to me, if you're in pain, it's your first kid, just come in. And I'm like, okay. He never asked how far apart are your contractions, how long are they lasting, nothing. Basically, if you're in pain, come in. So I hang up the phone, and then I'm still like, that really didn't help me at all. I'm obviously in pain. But I hear of all these women that go to the hospital and get sent home. I didn't want that to happen to me. So I was very apprehensive about going to the hospital. So anyways, it probably took me, 3 or 4 more contractions, and I'm like to Matt, all right, we're going. Pack up the car. We have to go to the hospital. I have to be in labor. So we get to the hospital, and on the way, at this point, I stopped timing the contractions again. I'm like, okay, this is it. I'm in labor. This has to be the real deal, whatever. So we get to the hospital. I walk up to labor and delivery. I check in. They get me in a room right away. I change into the gown, and immediately then after, the nurse comes in. She hooks me up to the contraction machine, and as soon as she hooks me up and turns the machine on, a contraction starts. So, she's watching it on the thing. It's going up, comes back down. So they monitored me for 10 minutes. And then she was going to have a doctor come in and check me. So at this point, my contractions were still about 4 minutes apart, lasting about 50 seconds. And she's basically to me, I'm all worried, telling her, I just don't want to be sent home. I'm so worried that they're going to send me home. And she's based on the contractions that I see, I'm going to assume they're not going to send you home. You're having very regular contractions. The doctor comes in and checks me, and I am almost 5 centimeters, so luckily for me, they did not send me home. And then the doctor tried to feel if the baby was head down. She couldn't really tell, so they did do an ultrasound. My husband and I, if you didn't know, did not find out the gender of the baby. So I'm at this point, I'm please don't tell me what it is. I've made it this far. Make sure you don't say what it is. So they do the ultrasound. The baby is head down. It was a very quick ultrasound. And then they get me into my birthing room. So this is when the fun begins. So I feel like I never wanted the epidural, but I feel like the nurses that I had were very pushy about the epidural. I was in a lot of pain, but it was bearable pain. I could get through the contractions. You know, they were just very adamant about the epidural. They kept asking me if I wanted it. Are you sure you don't want it? You know, now's the chance to get it. The contractions are going to get worse. You know, it's going to get to a point where you can't get the epidural. Are you sure? Like, I should have just been like, can you please shut your mouth? I'm not getting the epidural. Leave me alone. Get out of my room. But, you know, I'm nice. So I wasn't at all like that. And I'm just like, no, I really don't want the epidural. So then my nurse, you know, whatever. I don't know. About 2 hours goes by. My nurse comes back in and she's telling me about these shots that I can get that will help ease the pain a little bit, because I'm still like, I don't want the epidural. So I did end up getting the first shot, which I don't know what the shot was that they gave me. I don't know what it was called. It made me feel extremely loopy, like I was floating on a cloud. I remember talking to the nurse and like my voice to me sounded like weird, like I was drunk almost. But it definitely helped a ton with the contractions. Whatever the shot was, it did not last very long at all, maybe 30 or 40 minutes, and then it like was completely gone. So yeah, I did get that. Matt at this point was sleeping on the couch. We were watching Titanic on the TV. I ended up texting my mom at about 1 a.m. and telling her that I was in labor. I like lost all track of time at this point. I don't know what time anything happened. So they checked me about 2 hours later, and I was 6 centimeters. So at that point, at this point I think I was 100% effaced as well. So then I did go ahead and get the second shot, which the second shot did not work as well as the first one. I could feel more of the contractions. I feel like it wore off quicker, which the nurse did say that would happen. Whatever. Anyways, so then another hour goes by and I'm 7 centimeters. So then my doctor comes in, you know, she's checking me, saying I'm 7 centimeters. She wants to break my water. And this is another thing that I didn't like. Now that like I think of everything that happened that day or days, whatever, she broke my water right before her shift change. So like now that I think about it, she should have just waited for the next doctor to come on shift and just left it up to them instead of breaking my water and then just like leaving. And there was a shift change, so then I got a different doctor. Whatever, I didn't say anything. She broke my water at 7 centimeters, and immediately after she broke my water, I started panicking because I have the nurses in my ear. Are you sure you don't want the epidural? Blah, blah, blah about the epidural. And, you know, I go online and I read all these stupid things. This is why you don't go online and read stuff. You know, they say after your water breaks, the contractions are way more intense and blah, blah, blah. So, of course, then I'm immediately panicking after they break my water because I was already in pain, but I would say it was bearable pain. And I should have just stuck it out, but I got the epidural. And at this point, you know, I guess it was a good thing that I got the epidural, whatever. I got the epidural, and this was probably like around 3 or 4 in the morning. I'm not exactly sure. Like I said, I lost track of time. So when they do the epidural, you know, they have you like sit in a C shape, and this was like right after they broke my water. So I'm like leaking all this fluid out of me, which when they broke my water, it was the weirdest feeling. They do it with like this little hook and they just break it, and it's this warm sensation like you're peeing yourself and your water's broke. And I had so much fluid when I was hunched over for this epidural. So basically they put like a catheter in your back for the epidural, and you have to be in a seat and you have to be completely still, and the nurse is in front of me like holding my hands, and I am just like, I was having contractions still, and when I would have the contraction, it would just push all this water out of me. So this poor nurse, I felt so bad, was like covered in my amniotic fluid that was just like, would not stop leaking out of me. I felt so bad. It was quite embarrassing, but she's like, don't worry, honey, this like happens all the time. I'm like, no, this is not okay. But whatever. So they tell you when you get the epidural, if you can feel contractions on like either your left or right side of your body, that you should roll to that side of your body to kind of evenly disperse the epidural. They also gave me a button that I can push if I felt like I could feel my contractions too much. I never pushed the button, and I never had to roll to one side or the other. I always felt like I was fine, and I could still feel my contractions, but they were much more bearable. So I never wanted to push the button because I was worried then when I had to give birth, I wouldn't be able to like feel what I was doing. So I was scared to push the button, so I never pushed it. Yeah. So when I got the epidural, I was 7 centimeters. I had extremely regular contractions. I got this damn epidural, and it seemed like after that, everything slowed down. While I was in the hospital, I went through 3 shift changes. I seen 3 different doctors. So I don't even know how long, like how much time went on. All I know is I basically got to 9 centimeters, and I feel like I got to 9 centimeters fairly quickly. And then I was 9 centimeters for 8 hours. Like I just wouldn't progress any longer. Maybe into like 4 hours of being 9 centimeters, they put me on Pitocin. They upped the Pitocin to the highest dose. And then one of the doctors came in. Mind you, they have me on Pitocin. I'm on this epidural. I started getting a really bad stomach ache at one point. I thought I was hungry. When you get an epidural, you can't eat solid food. You can only eat like liquids. So I ordered chicken broth, and I ordered Italian ice. I took 1 like spoonful of the chicken broth, and I was like, no, I'm gonna be sick. So Matt like ran over a bucket, and I just like let it loose in the bucket. So then they came in and they started giving me nausea medicine. Whatever. Some time went on. They upped the Pitocin to the highest level it can be. Still not progressing. Another shift change happens. So now I'm on my 3rd doctor. When she comes in and checks me, this was another thing. Throughout being 9 centimeters, I had several different nurses and a different doctor check me. And they all agree, they all like think differently about how far you are. Some are like, no, she's 8. Some are like, no, she's 9. Whatever. So it's like everyone that comes in gauges you differently. I don't know. So basically I was 9 centimeters for 8 hours, give or take, whatever. They tried putting me in all these different positions with a peanut ball between my legs, laying on my side, sitting up more, laying all the way down, whatever. At one point the doctor checks me and tells me that the baby seems to be facing sideways instead of being face down. So she wanted to try to turn her. And this is why I say, thank God I had the epidural, because then this woman is like 2 hands, elbows deep inside of me, literally, manually turning the baby. And then she turns her the wrong direction. So now she is sunny side up instead of being head down. So at that point, it had already been however long. They tried to turn her. They tried to put me in all these different positions, whatever. Nothing was working. So she's like, I'm going to put an internal monitor on you. I want to really see, like, gauge what these contractions are doing. As soon as she puts the internal monitor on me, so you have, like, the strap that goes around your belly. It reads the baby's heart rate. You have something else that reads your heart rate, and then it also gauges your contractions. So then they put one, like, internally. I don't know if it goes, like, on the baby's head or on your cervix. I don't know exactly where it goes inside you, but it, like, really reads the contractions. So as soon as they hook that up, my contractions have slowed down so much, and this is with me on the highest amount of Pitocin that they could give me, that they're basically, like, stopping. Like, my labor is, like, stopping. My contractions are dwindling away. I knew as soon as they did this and they were watching the screen, I could tell by the look on their faces what they were going to say. And I, like, immediately before they even started saying anything, I just started bawling. And my mom and my aunt and my husband were in the room with me at this point, and I just started crying, and my mom was like, "What's wrong? What happened? Are you okay?" And I just didn't even want to say it, but I'm like, they're going to want me to get a C-section. And the doctor looks at me and she's like, well, at this point, you know, it's been 8 hours, you're 9 centimeters, your contractions are slowing down. She's like, but everything looks good. The baby's heart rate is fine, your heart rate is fine. If you want to wait a few more hours, we definitely can. I just don't see you progressing any further at this point. You know, the baby is sunny side up. She's not dropping any further. They're not saying she, because obviously we didn't know the gender, but whatever. So after being in labor now for, 20 plus hours in the hospital, it's like 7 p.m. at this point. I am completely exhausted. I'm, like, drained from basically laboring for this long and being in a bed for this long, that I'm just like, whatever. Let's just do the damn thing. Give me the C-section. Let's get this over with. Like, I can't do this any longer. And I just knew that she just, even if I waited those couple more hours, I couldn't get out of bed. I had this stupid epidural. Like, I just felt like nothing was going to change. The baby was sunny side up. She wasn't dropping. It had been 9 hours. I couldn't get any more Pitocin. Like, they couldn't up it anymore. Whatever. All right, so I'm going to stop right now, and I'm going to continue on in part 2. Part 2 is where I will talk about what was so traumatic that happened to me during my birth with this little beautiful dove. And if you are excited to see part 2, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you are not subscribed, please hit the red subscribe button below. My husband and I are going to brave a second pregnancy, a second child, and we are going to be doing a frozen embryo transfer here within the next month. So please join our journey of conceiving baby number 2. Say bye.
Bye. Bye.